With your boy Ancient Albatross here again with the Cypher Unlimited crew. We have our usual suspects of AD or Alpha Dean. We have Spigs18 or Anthony. And just as a quick reminder, if you haven't already, be sure to follow us here on Twitch and subscribe to us over on YouTube. It really helps us out a ton, and we really appreciate it. But Dean, what are we doing here tonight?
Man, today we're going to talk about pacing and attempt to define it in terms of Cypher. But we can also take these same questions and ask ourselves this for any role-playing game out there. But the best way to do this is to ask some questions like, what is pacing? Why is pacing so important? What are some of the pitfalls of poorly paced sessions? What are the different forms of pacing, and can you improve your sessions or campaign with good pacing? And finally, how does Cypher System mechanics themselves help a GM facilitate proper pacing? So to get started, I'm going to read Merriam-Webster's definition of what pacing is, and we're going to move into things from there. So in literature, pace or pacing is the speed at which a story is told, not necessarily the speed at which the story takes place. The number of words needed to write about a certain event does not depend upon how much time the event takes to happen. It depends upon how important that moment is in the story. And, from there, Anthony, I just wanted to say one thing to our listeners out there before we jump in and hit you guys with a few quotes that talk about pacing.
Yeah, we got some really good quotes that we pulled out from various people on the internet, and I think they're all really good quotes that give great examples of pacing and advice. Well, I want to say, like with all our chats, these discussions are meant to be a back and forth between us and the chat and people watching on Twitch, or if you're watching on YouTube, to watch on that. And personally, I know I could probably speak for my other two brothers, but pacing is something that could easily be practiced and you could get better at, right? But it's almost impossible to master, right? So all these advice and all the things that we're going to bring up today in this video is stuff that I think that everyone would benefit from working on, ourselves included. So if you have trouble with pacing, or if you have issues with your pacing in games, that's okay, because it's all about getting better and it's about growing. And the only way you grow or get better at anything is by actually doing it and taking a conscious effort to want to improve your pacing. So with that said, it's about a back and forth between us and the chat. And if you're on YouTube, feel free to put your comments on pacing, because none of us here are claiming to be literary pacing expert, narrative pacing experts. So, we all want to learn, we all want to grow together, we all want to become better GMs. So with that said, I pulled out 3 quotes that I think encapsulate what I feel are good examples of pacing and advice on pacing. So, Al, do you want to read the first quote?
Yeah. And just to piggyback a little off what you said, I'm probably the worst here when it comes to pacing, so this should be a wonderful topic for me. But either way, let's dive right in onto the first quote, which comes from Monty Cook and Shauna Germain from Your Best Game Ever. And that quote is, "The key to becoming a great GM, more than anything else, is an understanding of pacing." And again, that was from Monty Cook and Shauna Germain from Your Best Game Ever.
And if you haven't picked up Your Best Game Ever, it's a great book on gaming advice. There's a ton of advice. My phone is ringing in the background, gym intrusion. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Yeah. The pacing changed because my phone is ringing. But I'll read the second quote. The second quote I got from a YouTube video like almost 6 years ago, and I still remember this quote. So that it's a good quote. I got it from the Roll for Story YouTube channel, and I remember seeing this video several years ago, and I knew when I was writing the notes for this episode today, I knew I had to find the video, so I spent like 30 minutes trying to find this video, and I actually did, and I got the quote. So here's the quote from the Roll for Story YouTube channel. "Here is a good way to understand pacing. Think of your story like pearls on a string. The pearls are the events in the story, and the string is the transition between events. A well-paced story will take its time with the pearls, adding details and making it shiny while skipping over the string, which is the less interesting to the audience." I thought that was a great example or analogy of what exactly pacing is.
Yeah, that is a great quote. And then again, you know, I'm gonna make my quotes comes from Michael Shea, aka Sly Flourish. So everybody out there who's ever looked at anything from Sly Flourish knows that, you know, there's always gems that come out of this guy's mouth. And you know, he states, good pacing requires understanding how the game feels at the moment and ensuring it feels fun. It means keeping up forward momentum and knowing when to pull back to let things just be when the time is right. I think that encapsulates just another, you know, that encapsulates the both quotes that Anthony and Al, you know, relayed to us, because being able to shift that gear, you know, back and forth, speed up, slow down, it gives you those moments. So, and
Yeah, just to say, if you don't know who Michael Shea is, or aka Sly Flourish, the writer of The Lazy Dungeon Master, shame on you, because you should know who he is. He's probably the premier gaming advice, you know, person on the internet, between his books, his YouTube videos, his Twitch channels. And we'll definitely have him on our YouTube channel, the links, because everything it's like what Dean said, everything he drops is usually a jewel in gold. So you should definitely consume everything Sly Flourish puts out there, because they're all great advice.
so without further ado, guys, let's jump right in. And the first question that we're going to ask is, why is pacing so important to a GM?
There's several reasons, but I think what I wrote in the notes, I think is the most important. The first one is hold your audience's attention and to encourage the engagement with your narrative. And what I mean by that is, if your pacing is off, whether you're going, you know, because pacing works two ways. You can either be going too fast, you know, running through the story, or going too slow. And in either one of those scenarios, you risk losing the attention of the players, right? And if the players are not engaged with the story, it's just a bad experience for everyone. It sucks to be a GM when no one's engaged with your story. And it sucks to be a player when the GM is running through everything too quickly, and you know, it's hard for you to catch up, or the player's not giving you enough information and leaving it super open-ended. Well, that, you know, what you call it, you have no idea what you're doing. So, you know, first and foremost, pacing is paramount to hold the engagement of your table.
Most definitely. Because especially, like, again, this is something I struggle with. So again, I'm still learning, but so take everything especially I say with a grain of salt. But
no, all opinions are valid. I think the most valid opinions are the ones that recognize that they're struggling on something.
Yeah. Most definitely. But either way, though, what Anthony was getting at is definitely super valid, because when you're going too fast, the players feel like you're just like nothing's an important event, like these pearls on the string analogy. If you're going too fast, everything just feels like string. There's nothing sticking out, and it's hard to, you know, the pearls are what, you know, the juicy conflicts are what people are looking for to stay engaged. And then if you're going too slow, the pearls are too stretched out, and again, it's that same analogy, there's too much string. Again, you're going to lose that engagement, and yeah, it's just bad all around.
Yeah, and see, and
Actually, Al, hold on a second. Al, I think if you go too slow, you have no string at all, so there's no transition from scene to scene. I mean, if you're going too fast, there's no string at all, so there's no transition.
It's all pearl, so it basically becomes string.
Yeah, it becomes one big scene.
There's no differentiation between anything. And I think that in of itself, you know, those two ideas as well, you know, set up right for the next point, which is being able to tell your story in an allotted time. You know, and you know, we're going to actually get into the different kind of pacing, but that becomes huge no matter what type of pacing you're using, what type of story you're telling, whether it's a one shot or a session for a campaign or so on and so forth. You know, but being able to get what you need to get done within that allotted block of time. So if you got 2 hours versus 4 hours, versus 6 hours, the pacing is going to be entirely different.
I think some people, maybe we're in the day and age where and us in particular, where we play with a lot of strangers is the wrong word, but we play with a lot of different people on the internet. And if you agree to say, hey, this game is 4 hours, or if you're playing in a con and someone signs up for a 3-hour session, right? It's the GM's responsibility to tell a complete story within that time frame. And the biggest culprit of why that doesn't happen is because of pacing. I mean, this is the one direct link that, playing within a lot of time and pacing are directly connected to each other. Like, if you can't complete the game in the allotted time and you didn't make the proper steps or adjustments to make it fit in game, then that was absolutely a pacing issue.
Right. And the thing about it is, I think identifying, those situations, being able, look, nobody wants to feel, again, we've talked about this before. Nobody wants to feel like they're railroading their players or something like that. But when you look at a 4-hour adventure or a 2-hour adventure or whatever the case may be, there's certain points and you want to get from point A to point B. And so
before we get into the advice, we just talking about why is it important?
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. You want to get from point A to point B, and you might have, sub point 1, 2, and 3 in the middle. And, just understanding how to allot the time for those things is very important.
I will say this, usually it's not a huge problem if you're playing mostly home games, because again, this is where I struggle the most. My games usually run long. And thankfully, these are, online, basically home games where the players are okay with it usually. That's not always the case. So it's always good to be on those P's and Q's to get done and you're, as close to that a lot of time as you can. But there is that little bit of leeway when you are playing with friends and it is more of a home game environment. So you can, take those steps to learn.
I will say this, Al, I don't necessarily agree with that because I think more friends are lenient not to tell you that it was long, and they may give you the perception that they're okay with it, but and beyond the 18-year-old me, I don't think I've ever enjoyed the 8-hour session of a game when it could have been done in 4 hours.
Oh, I'm not talking about that much. Oh, I'm talking about like 30 minutes to an hour.
I'm going to the extreme, but
Yes. And I think, Anthony, you bring up a good point. When I was younger,
my point I was just trying to make is that when you say, when you're playing with friends are less likely to tell you that they dislike something because you are friends and they don't want to, they don't want to discourage you in any way.
I mean, I guess I'm lucky then because y'all are my friends and y'all tell me this. So I'm speaking of my personal experience. Y'all straight up tell me when I'm off.
You deal with a couple of old grognards and we ain't afraid to tell people, hey.
I know exactly. You have your faults are the opposite spectrum of my faults. So in the advice section, we have some really good advice that's going to actually help you because you're on the too slow side and I'm on the too fast side. So I know how to correct the too slow side. So there's some really good advice in that section, but we're just talking about why is it important. So we'll move on to like the next two because this isn't really the meat of our conversation, right? The other two that I jotted down was it focuses on eliminating in-game downtime and unimportant scenes, events, and dialogues that bog down game sessions. And what I just mean by that is if you understand how to pace a session correctly, all those stuff that slow down your game, as in, like unimportant scenes, letting the characters create events that mean nothing to the narrative or the story and could easily, if it could be edited out of a book or a TV show, it could be edited out of a gaming table. And of course, letting the players ramble on with dialogue that's needless to the story, which is one of Al's problems. if you cut that out, it cuts significantly the time played, and it also helps. It also helps with pacing.
Right.
And the last one I put in there is freaking. This is the truth. A good pace session helps with the overall enjoyment of the game session. I think we can all agree with that.
Right. Absolutely. Without a doubt. And we touched on this earlier. We were talking about that there's different forms of pacing, which a lot of people, I think that's something else that when you define it and you start looking at it through those lenses, you'll be able to see the difference. We're going to talk about each one, but there's scene pacing, session pacing, and campaign pacing. Which again, scene pacing is just that. How important is the scene that you're in? How much time do you need to make that scene punch and before you can move on to the next scene? Those thinking it through those lenses is very important. Session pacing is like we said before, that's like your one shots versus your campaigns. How long is this session running? What Anthony was saying, is it a 2-hour experience? Is it a 3-hour experience? Is it a 4-hour experience? Absolutely important. And then the campaign pacing actually brings those two ideas in play. And those are very important, to make sure your campaign runs a specific way. And this way you can actually kind of extrapolate or envision where your campaign is going to go and how long it's going to take you to get to your end game. So
I'm just curious in chat, if out of these 3 forms of pacing, what do you think is the most difficult to do? I can tell you, for me personally, I probably have a hardest time with scene pacing, which would seem weird because I personally think it's human nature that if you think a scene is it's really hitting, right? Like it's really the players have seemed to be gravitating towards this scenario, this scene, and having a lot of fun. It's hard for me to let go when I think the players are having fun, but my internal clock is telling me, hey, we got to move on. We got to keep the story moving forward. So me personally, I probably have a harder time with my individual scene pacing than anything else.
Stormbringer, our good buddy Mike out there, said 2 things. He says session pacing seems to be the hardest for him, and 2 hours is hard. And you know what? I look at it, it's funny because I would say for me, session pacing might be the hardest as well. And the only reason I don't find 2 hours being hard is because I just think of 2 hours as 1 or 2 scenes. Because I'm pretty good at, keeping the ball rolling and transitioning, and finding a way to plug in what needs to happen next with what's going on in that moment. But the session part is what catches me up because I really want to make sure we have a full experience. And so sometimes, a scene might run a little too long or something like that so my session doesn't always equate to the exact amount of time.
Yeah. Someone in chat brought up con games. And first of all, let me just go back to this. I think the advice we're going to give can apply to all 3 forms of pacing, just on a micro scale, a standard scale, and then an elongated scale for campaign pacing. But all the, like the advice that I'm going to give you on session pacing is the same advice that you could just, put it on a micro scale and put it to your scene pacing. But somebody in chat mentioned con games and how since the adventure is broken down for you, I forgot who it was. Kazrek mentioned in cons, he said, I'm always glad when I run con games when the module includes time estimates for each session to help things moving at the proper pace. That's a great point, and that's one of the bit of advices we're going to give. I will say this about con modules or just adventure modules, period. Do not be afraid to remove a whole section of an adventure if you're running out of time. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I see on first-time con GMs. And I'm gonna say this as clearly as I could say. If I sit in a table and I pay to play a game, right? And chat, feel free to tell me if I'm wrong. I have two expectations. I have an expectation that I'm gonna find out what's gonna happen at the end of this adventure because I paid. So I wanna know how it ends, right? And I wanna find out how it starts. So those are the two scenes that you have to include. You don't know how many con games I sat that they concentrated on some middle part of the adventure, right? Like skill checks or whatever it was, traveling to the big bad to fight the big bad. And then they speed through the ending because they realize they only have 30 minutes left in this 4-hour session. And, they, like totally bypass the end. The ending is the most memorable part, right? So why would you do that?
I ran the counter complex for Cypher System at a Gen Con, and that particular it's a predation adventure. It's a wild ride. Oh my God! But what Anthony is telling you is absolutely right. I ran it like 3 times that weekend, 3 or 4 times that weekend. Each session was its own unique session, but the one major thing, it was, and we had talked about it that day. Remember we talked about it that night before in the room, and that was the biggest point. That was something I hadn't thought about in that terms. And Anthony just made it at that point, and so that's what I did. I made sure I didn't care. We went off the rails a little bit with the middle section, but that first scene and that last scene were solid directly from the module. So anybody who talked about it could tell you. And anything that happened in the middle was okay for it to be all over the place because, hey, it's an RPG.
Yeah, when I run a con game, I always read the end scene first because I know that's what you have to nail that. Or at least I personally feel that. I feel like if I nail, even if I have some hiccups or make some mistakes in the beginning portion or the middle portion, if I nail the end, I can make it. I could make a cohesive story and make it enjoyable for the table. So I always make sure I read the final. Okay, where are they going to end up at? What's this last scene going to look like?
And sometimes Anthony can just read the title too.
And the cool thing about focusing on the end scene there is, like you said, if you do have hiccups in the beginning, in the middle, whatever have you, if you have a really powerful, good ending, that's what's going to leave the impression. That's the last thing they did. That's going to be the freshest in their mind. And you'll still leave a good impression, even if there were hiccups in the beginning and the middle.
But you're absolutely right. Having the advice that he initially gave from his comment in the chat is something that we wrote down, is having a estimated time for scenes. So when you sit at a con and they give you estimated, this scene is going to take 30 minutes. That's what you should be doing in your home games when you're prepping. Whether you're a big time prepper or a little prepper, you should either have an internal clock in your head saying, hey, this scene is going to take whatever allotted time that you assume it will take, and try to stick as closely to it as you possibly can.
And look at that look at that in the macro as well when we start talking about campaigns. No, the same thing goes for your campaign. Do the same thing. If you're running a campaign and you're going to run, let's just say you want to make this campaign last 12 sessions. You need to have exactly what needs to happen at the beginning of each session, which will allow you to control your scenes.
And if you look at it in the elongated form, you should pre-plan how many sessions is it going to take for you to hit your finale. So, exactly. So if you broke it down in the individual session, but if you look at it from a long form, in your mind you're going to say, hey, I know I need 3 sessions to do this grand finale of this 12 session arc, right? So then you plan accordingly.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. And I've done that. I've run many campaigns on the server, 6 episodes and 12 episodes. And that's literally what I did. Like Anthony said, making sure that I know, okay, I need at least 2 sessions for the finale. Okay, I got 6 sessions, but 2 sessions are for the finale.
So those are the, I'm sorry, Dean, go ahead.
No, that was it. I was done.
So those are the three kinds of pacing, and the advice we're gonna give you is could be applied, and we could actually go back and hit each individual section of pacing with the advice, right? But before we do that, right, this is the if you're an unsuspecting GM and don't realize you're having pacing issues, if you have, we're gonna mention three things, right? If any of these three things to apply to you, you might be having some pacing issues. So Al, you want to read the first one that might apply?
Yeah. First one's pretty easy one. Pretty, if you don't notice this, you might need to really investigate or look within yourself. But if you are having a hard time holding your players' attention or keeping the group engaged, there's a pretty obvious sign there.
You too might be having a pacing issue.
And if you can't keep your games within the allotted time for the session,
you too might be having a pacing issue. And the last one, are your players suffering from information overload and they don't have a clear idea what they're supposed to be doing, or have a clear understanding of what are some possible actions for their characters?
you
might be
having a pacing issue.
And I could personally say I've been victim to all three of these.
Hey, with the learning curve, yes, this definitely, because you have to learn. There's certain things you do have to learn. It's an RPG. It's interactive storytelling. You're not writing the story. This isn't your book. This isn't your story alone. The player characters are the stars of the book. So they need to be engaged. They need to be important.
And I will say this, if you're a GM or DM, whatever you want to call yourself, you don't think you've suffered from any of these problems, you're probably lying. Like, everybody suffers from it at one point or another. Like, it's just a universal issue. Like, that's why we said in the beginning, it's something you can always improve upon.
Hey, Jason C says this is why if you have a limited time, like a single session, you really need to railroad a bit. It's one of the compromises you have to make. And yes and no. But then, I guess that's the difference. I would say yes if you have a very specific story you're trying to tell, but if you have any improvisational skills or anything like that, you should be able to look at your session and know, what, I need to have these 3 or 4 story beats. And you make sure those story beats happen and let them unfold organically, however necessary, but you make sure it's an allotted amount of time. So if that's going to be the railroading you're doing, that's perfect.
I think the definition of railroad has to be defined before that word gets thrown out, because I think everyone views railroad as a different word. Maybe that's another video for another time.
You're right. We probably should do that.
Because what you may see as railroad and what I may see as railroad might be 2 entirely different things. Like, some people say, oh, that's railroading, and then I'll look at the situation and be like, no, that's just good GMing.
Right.
Like, it's only a railroad if the players know that there's a railroad in front of them.
That's what I'm saying. Jason just said it right. They don't have to see the rails. And that's what I was getting to. It's just that you don't have to necessarily let your players know that they're looking at rails. Stormbreaker.
Right, so those are the things. And I will say this, I've been victim to all 3 of these, faults in GMing. I've been victim to all 3 of these faults in the same session as a GM. Right?
Yeah, I think we all have.
So the only way you can improve upon it is by constantly doing it and recognizing that, hey, there's nothing wrong as a GM to tell your players, hey, wait a minute, can we backtrack this, or can we that didn't go the way I want. So in the next session, can we do this? Like, having those open conversations could eliminate a lot of your problems, because sometimes the players create your own personal pacing issues unknowingly. And if you could recognize that as well, and if it's a campaign, and have those conversations, you could eliminate some of these problems. And the other one is just basically, self-analyzing and going, hey, how can I do, how can I eliminate some of these? How can I do this better?
And just so everybody knows, if you do have questions, just so you know, you do have questions. We're going to ask for them, and we're just going to keep track of them. I got your question, Mike. I'll answer that when we get to that portion of the show.
All right, so here's the part with chat. I know everybody's been chat's been giving us great advice on pacing, and I love it. Keep them coming. But we just jotted down a couple of, I don't know, it's like 7 or 8 things that I think will help improve your pacing session. And if they're right, they're wrong, or you're indifferent about them, let us know in chat. You know, because the whole idea, like we said, is to have an open conversation and to spark discussion. So this is my personal one, and this is the one that I think the advice I would give Al personally, because I think once I started doing this absolutely helped me out with my pacing, but is know what, and this applies for a 4-hour session, a scene session, or a campaign. Going in, even if you're an improv GM, there's 2 things you have to know, right? 2 things you absolutely have to know is how your game is going to start, and most importantly, is how your game is going to end. Know what the ending is, have an idea, and how long do you think your ending is going to take? Because if you work backwards, right, if you know how long the end is going to take, it's going to be so much easier for you to adjust your time in the middle of the game if you know how you want your session to end. If you know you want your session to end with a climactic battle on the top of a mountain with a swarm of aliens flying, dragons, flying winged dragons, and you know you need an hour to an hour and a half to complete that. In the middle of the game, you're going to be like, hey, I'm running short on time. Let me cut out some of these needless scenes so I know that I have time. And remember I said earlier, your ending you should never cheat the time on your ending, right? So if you know your ending, it's gonna help your pacing out tremendously.
And another thing to remember is you're the only person that knows what's being cut out as the GM. You're the only person that knows. So your players won't feel shorted or slighted, especially if it's something that you've created or so on and so forth. Now, if it's a pre-written adventure and they've read it, that's a different story. But overall, that experience is up to you as the GM, So just remember that. So, and keep that, keep that in the forefront of your mind as well.
And again, cutting things is not the end of the world, because again, if whether it's a campaign or one shot or whatever have you, that's still an idea that hasn't been seen by an audience if that's your first time running it, and you can always throw it into another session, throw it into the next session of the campaign. It's not wasted material.
Exactly.
Yeah, always work. I mean, I personally like to work backwards. Even when I'm writing a one shot, I like to know how and what I mean by ending, I don't mean railroading that the characters, but know where the story is going to conclude at. And that could mean a lot of things, but that could mean a battle. That could mean,
a cliffhanger. That means you can literally.
But know where you're ending at, because if you know where it's going to end, it's a lot easier to know what, to build out the beginning and the middle if you know where you want the session to end.
And the next piece of advice we put down was have a timer, either an internal one or a physical one, to help with time management. This is a good thing to do, especially if you don't have good time management skills. Set yourself a little timer, on your phone or on your tablet. Keep one at the table, something that you can just peek at. By keeping those ideas at the forefront of your mind, it helps you. Again, it helps. It encourages the pacing to be organic versus seeming clunky or so on and so forth.
Jam X Runner wrote in chat. I think he has the main issue that I have. My passing issue is the other way, going too fast. Sometimes I feel like I'm skipping over things that the players may want to actually do. That's my issue. And I feel that helps with me is I'll take a little deep breath, and I'll purposely create a scene with either NPC that encourages internal dialogue, and it gives me a moment to just sit back and listen, right? And then according to what the players are saying in character, lets me know if I'm zooming things too fast. Because you'll start to hear things like, oh, but I don't know, which way should we be going again? Or what is it that we need to get? And those are like cues for you as a GM to go, oh, wait, maybe I sped that narrative. I mean, I sped that dialogue. I'm not giving them enough information. Or so, and I'll purposely say, hey, I'm gonna give them 5 minutes, right? And one, it helps me like slow my internal clock down. And two, it gives me information of what information that I may have missed by speeding up so much. I don't know if that helps, but it helps me.
It's a good idea.
But yeah, the next tip we have here, start the adventure or session with the pace and tone you're going for in the very beginning. It would help with pacing for the entire session if you're hitting your mark in the very beginning. And what that means is start strong. I think what Kedhup said here is kind of relevant to this. Is one of the pacing things I bring up is skip the tedious bits. In Lord of the Rings, Mines of Moria, they skip the literal days of traveling through tunnels and only focus on the interesting bits. You don't need anything else. For instance, the way this is related is at the beginning of the story, and this is something I'm learning too, or I have learned, is you don't need a big, like full on like hour-long scene that's an introduction to the story. Like for instance, a mistake I would make often is I would have the players usually meet with some important NPC where there's a dialogue between the two where they're learning information about what they need to do, etc., like information gathering. But an super easy way to cut all that out is cut it to that they're already on the way to what they need to do, and like just detail a short little 5-minute or so flashback or whatever scene, like set it up where they've already learned that stuff. That dialogue is already cut out because that dialogue just leads to the same information anyway. So you're cutting out tedious bits to get to the juicy bits.
Right. And another thing, especially if you're working in a confined time space, 2-3 hours, like we were talking earlier, that is huge, Al, what you just said. Get them moving, give them a flashback, and you can actually turn little things into mechanical ideas. Hey, if they didn't get to talk to the guy, well, did you ask him this question or did you ask that question? Stuff like that can be actually handled, with a lore check, knowledge check, so on and so forth. Did you remember this? These are little ways to get the game moving, keep it moving, that strong start you're talking about, and move from there.
It's my go?
Yep.
Yeah, that was all great advice. And Q have wrote a chat that Jason wrote, I've tried to start with roll for initiative only once in a while, but it's still cool. That goes with the start, start with combat and then go back and tell the information, which is always great advice, especially for a one shot.
Yep.
Like, I wrote this down, and I think this is also paramount and important in pacing, but I wrote practice your game editing. Remove or add scenes on the fly depending on the time spent on previous scenes. And that goes back to the internal clock, right? And that goes to written adventures, that goes, if you know that the players were enjoying a particular scene and you took a little longer than you anticipated to complete that scene and try to transition into a next scene, right? It's okay to say, how important is this next scene? Or on a micro scale in a scene structure is, you develop the combat where they're fighting 3 orcs and 2/3 into the combat, another 3 orcs appear. If those players took longer than you anticipated fighting those 3 original orcs, you never have to bring in the other 3 orcs.
Exactly.
If it's going to shorten the combat or if it isn't adding any enjoyment into the game. So, that advice also evolves on the micro scale. So it applies for dialogue. Like if you had the characters purchasing items from a shopkeeper, and in your head you plan them to haggle for a specific cipher, right? If they spend 10 minutes joking around with this thing, just have them give them the cipher, because the shopkeeper had such a great time talking to one of the MPs, one of the player characters, to eliminate some time and to improve your pacing. So, you know, self-editing on the fly, you know, is a you know, improv is difficult for everybody, but it's something that you can practice over and over again in all your games.
Even if you are the prep, the king prep DM, GM, whatever the case may be, what Anthony is saying is absolutely paramount. You have to learn, you know, no, I won't say you have to, but it will behoove you to learn those simple improvisational moments, just because it's going to save you, you know, it's going to save you in both directions.
I mean, I would think, and I can't speak for a massive prepper because I'm far from that, but I would think that it's actually easier to edit as a massive prepper because all the information is directly in front of you. So you could be, you know, you could be looking at all the information, and while the players are talking or involved in the scene, just start scratching stuff off or adding, because it also works the other way around. If the players are going through your scenes too fast, you could add, because you have all this extra prep, and, you know, add an additional, you know, scene into your session, you know, and it should be easier for the improv GM. You know, you have to come up with all these ideas, you know, or it's a lot harder to start an idea and then have to remove it when you don't even know where the idea is going as an improv GM.
Yeah.
I mean, and it is, you know, it's super strong. And again, if you're, and I said this before, but if you're finding yourself having to remove, like you're this over prepper, you find yourself having to remove scenes, you still have that material for another session, another, you know, whatever have you. It's, again, don't feel afraid to cut because you feel like you're wasting. It is never a waste because it can always be reused.
Yeah.
And this next piece of advice, I will sing its praises, because I think this is probably one of the most important things that you can. Know important rules of the game that you are playing, or how to operate the VTT you're using if you're playing online, to eliminate needless discussion and time wasted during an actual game. Now, even if you're learning a new game, you know, there's a thing that we've always told you about. Make a judgment call and figure the rule out later. Those things are imperatives when you're sitting at a table. But if you know the rules, or you make a ruling, you know, and establish that kind of that relationship or that idea with your players early on. Listen, I'm going to tell the story. We're going to do this. If there's a rules question or something like that, you know, write it down. We're going to table it. I'm going to make a ruling. We're going to keep the game going, and we'll discuss it afterwards. If, you know, I learned to play D&D just like that. I made so many mistakes early on. It was crazy, you know, but, you know, we kept the game moving. We had fun. We were having a blast. And, you know, I made some of the worst, you know, rules calls ever until I learned the rules. So just
I purposely learn the important rules, because right, what Dean said, you don't need to know every rule, but you should know what the you know, base core, like the mechanics, 3 or 4 major mechanics or whatever system you're playing, not only Cypher System. So, you know, if we use a Cypher System as an example, is, you know, you should know what the target numbers are, what effort and edge is, you know, what a GM intrusion is, you know, what do you get on the 18, 19, or 20? You should know all that ahead of time. You know what I mean? And the VTT portion, I think I included this because this is, once again, we're in this day and age where the majority of gaming for most people now, I believe, is online, you know, between COVID and just like the, you know, so many different VTTs out there that, you know, to encourage people to game online, is know the basics of the VTT. You know how many times I've played in games where we wasted. Not only does it break immersion, it fucks up the DM's pacing, the GM's pacing. If, you know, every 20, 30 minutes, you have to figure out how to do something. You know what I mean? So if you know the basics, and if you don't know the basics, recognize it early and just abandon it. If you don't know how to do the initiative order chart, guess what? Break out a pen and paper and go, John, you first, Dean, you second, Al, you third, right? You know, don't make the same mistake over and over again.
Right. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't know Roll20 as well as some people. And there's features on Roll20 that I would love to use, but because I don't know them, I don't use them. You know what? Let's play.
Exactly. When it comes to VTTs, it's not that you have to be an expert and know every single facet of every single feature. It's knowing the features that will be prevalent at the table that will keep your game running smooth. Because, yeah, things like Roll20, whatever have you, Foundry, they might have a whole bunch of these little features that are intimidating at first, but really you only need a handful of them to, you know, bare bones get a game going. And as long as you have those down pat, you know, you don't really have to worry about all the bells and whistles if you don't need them.
Right. And the same thing when you're talking about a game with mechanics. I mean, Cypher System does not have the amount of mechanics to say, let's say D&D or even Savage Worlds. But the thing with the mechanics in Cypher System that people have to remember too is, though they are simple, they are very elegant and they're very flexible. They're very modular. They are easily manipulated. And the interpretations, you know, are those things that, you know, you need to kind of embrace and be ready for, because this is how, you know, this is how you're going to run your game.
You have, well, which I can't agree as strongly as I possibly, he's 100% right on this. He says, don't feel you need to use all the bells and whistles. I use all those in Foundry VTT because I have a tech background. But all you need is a place to roll and the click clack of math rocks. Absolutely, I couldn't say it better myself. Absolutely correct. You know, and just it's about recognizing it. You know, it's about knowing when to save time, and also occupying your brain space on stuff that's going to hurt your overall pacing of the game. You know, if you're concentrating on stuff that is already giving you anxiety and worrying about what, it's just going to affect your how you run the game to begin with.
And one other thing I'm going to add to that, Anthony, because there's a very good point. Queued up, you and Anthony, remember this too. Sometimes we get enamored with what we see, the capabilities of this thing, but we haven't taken the time to learn this thing. So, like you said, know your strength, embrace it. Now, you want to use the bells and whistles, you want to play the music, you got to learn the instrument, and that's very important. You know, that's why we say know the important rules, know how to operate your VTT.
Yep. And before I move on to the next tip here, I was gonna say exactly what Jam X Runner said was, Owlbear Rodeo is one of the most basic ones. Is the one I tend to gravitate to because, again, you get the place to roll your dice, upload a map, you got a place for character sheets. It's all you need really, and it's such an awesome low what is it?
Low maintenance.
Low maintenance, low learning curve VTT. But yeah. Let me move on to the next one here. So this is a really important one. Learn to read the table. Know when to speed up or slow down the gameplay of scenes to improve player engagement. And this is just harks back to, you should know what your table enjoys and what they don't enjoy. And if you don't know beforehand, learn to recognize it in the moment. Because once you learn to recognize it, you can extend the scenes that they really enjoy, get the maximum player engagement, and have the scene shorter when it regards to things they don't particularly enjoy. And again, if you're playing with friends, you might already know this, but if you don't, like let's say you're playing a con game or you just pick up game with strangers, having that ability to tell at the table whether they're enjoying something or not enjoying something is such a strong tool. It's amazingly strong to keep that pace where you want it to be, to keep that nice player engagement going.
This is, I think, one of the skills that's the most hardest to master. right? And the reason, and especially, I think, because it's two separate skills, right? Playing online and playing in person are two different skill sets you need to read a table, right? When you in person at a con or with your friends, you have the visual of seeing everyone, their movements, whatever mannerisms. You could tell, it's a lot easier to tell as a GM what's the overall mood and feel of the table. Online, even with cameras, it's a lot more difficult, right? There's still ways of doing it, but it's a lot more difficult, especially when you're playing, usually when you're playing online, unless it's a long-standing group, there's always newcomers in an online game. So you don't understand the mannerisms. Someone could be like dead. I've played with so many people, like they'll be deadpan the entire session. And in my mind, it's like, yo, this guy must freaking hate my guts. Like he's probably thinking I wasted 4 hours of his time. And then at the end of the session, that'll be the one person that'll come to you and say, hey, that was the greatest session I ever had. And then you're like amazed, like, wow, why didn't you smile in the 4 hours that you were playing? You know what I mean? That actually happened at Gen Con online.
During the height of the pandemic. I ran, quite a few games that weekend, and I was like, man, these people are there. I'm tanking, I'm good. And all of them were joining Cypher Unlimited and saying it was a great game. So yeah.
And with saying that too, even if you're not good at reading the table, right? Still make assumptions and still try to change things up. Because once again, I'm gonna harp back to what I said at the very beginning of this video. The only way we all improve is by making adjustments and trying. So like if you personally feel like, hey, I feel like this table, I need to slow down a bit because I'm rushing the information out, even though they're not saying that, slow down anyway. Because the table will let you know if you made the right decision.
Yeah. So, and lastly, last piece that we're going to throw out here is don't be afraid to cut between players during a scene to keep everyone engaged or to help a player think if they need time for a decision, especially if they're slowing down the overall pace of the scene. And that's a strong piece of advice. And I'm going to add one other little caveat to that. Realize how many players you have at the table. Find your sweet spot for the number of players that you're going to have at your table so you can give everybody their equal share of time. Everybody should feel engaged. Everybody should feel a part of the story. So that being said, moving through your players, that all becomes part of your ideological prep. Every player is going to get 5 minutes of screen time in this scene or something.
And I failed to add this part because I talked about cutting a player that was taking too long, but it also works in reverse as well. And I should have put that in there, my bad. But is also don't be scared to curb the player that's over anxious and is dominating the gameplay, because that affects pacing as well. Whether you know it or not, if you have one player that's constantly moving the story forward because they doing everything, they're doing all the talking, right? It directly affects the other players, which makes them slow down. You know what I mean? So then when you do go back to them, they almost like, oh, why am I going to do anything? Because John is doing everything, or Jessica is doing all the talking anyway. I'm just going to sit back. You know what I mean?
You remember the one game either you ran it or I ran it, but we had the one. I think we both had the same player, and they did try to do the same thing in both of our games. Was trying to tell other players how their character was going to respond and react. Like, dude, you can't play every character at the table. This is somebody else's character.
Or you could flat out say it, but if you don't want to embarrass them in any way, there's ways you could do it where you literally describe it in the narrative. It says, as you talking to this, the camera pans to ancient albatross and just change the scene to a scene that person is not in. So they can't interrupt. And if they say anything, that's when you say, hey, yo, look, you've been talking for 20 minutes. Al's been sitting patiently. Let's allow them to have a scene.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like you said, you just, and that's the thing. That's another talent part of the pacing that you learn. You learn the tactful manner in which to, engage your players.
And what KedHub said here is excellent for if it's in a moment where, basically everyone's all together, there's no way to split the scene. Sometimes if someone is dominating, instead of moving the spotlight, try to spread that spotlight. Mention or bring other players into it, meld them together. And what he means by that is, let's say someone's dominating this one scene and 2 or 3 players are just sitting back, just letting it happen. You as the GM interject and say, hey, player B, what are you saying while all this is going down? Cut in there and let the other players have that chance to input into the scene. That's part of your job as the GM.
And that will give you, I mean, and that's becoming comfortable in your position as the GM. And it also will give you the confidence to start controlling your scene, as Jason was saying earlier about that railroad that people don't necessarily have to know that they're on. They don't have to see the rails, but it gives you the confidence, the GM, to lay the tracks to tell the story.
And the last bit of advice, which isn't on here, is, and this is an issue too, is recognizing when a scene is stale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's, I think that's hard for us as GMs, because in your mind, you thought this scene was a winner, right? So in your mind, like, oh, and then like everything can't be a winner, right? And it's happened to me plenty of times where I came up with this, what I thought was a cool idea or a cool encounter or a cool NPC, and then I bring it out to the table and it's a flat dud. You know what I mean? No one's engaging with it, or that, you could sense the table disinterested. Is recognizing it, cutting your losses and going, okay, we're transitioning to the next scene because this isn't working.
But there's, since you mentioned the word stale, there's also the flip side, which is what I suffer from, is a scene is going very well, the players are enjoying it, so you let it go on possibly a little too long. And again, the players might be enjoying it, but it becomes stale in regards to your progress with the pacing. Again, they may love it, they may be enjoying the hell out of it, but it fucks up your ending because now you have 20, 30 minutes less for that ending.
Yeah, but it goes back to that internal clock, Al, is give yourself a lot of time for any particular scene and don't go past 5 minutes beyond that scene.
Yeah, don't go past the stale date.
Regardless of how much fun they're having, you could always, as a GM, you could always transition that convo into the next scene. You know what I mean? Like if they're really enjoying an NPC bartender, guess what? The bartender goes, hey, I'm off. Are you heading to the armory now? I'm going too. Let me walk with you.
Mm-hmm. Excellent advice.
You know what I mean? It's recognizing that, okay, they really enjoyed it. They want to keep this convo going, but I still have to transition into my next scene.
So, and with that being said, we can move right into how the Cypher mechanics help a GM facilitate proper pacing.
But this is good because I think Cypher System is actually one of the better systems where it actually gives you mechanics in terms of pacing that help you out tremendously. A lot more than a lot of other systems do for that. Even though all the advice we gave can be applied to any system, but I think Cypher System in particular has mechanics built in that actually help you with your pacing.
Yeah, because, and if you think about it, most of the Cypher System things that they use like that, they're mechanics, but they're also suggestions. They're internal suggestions. So like our first one, probably, our favorite mechanic there is GM and player intrusions. That is a excellent tool for pacing. When you use a GM intrusion, that adds a complication that can turn a scene around, that can change the tone of the entire adventure, just in one little maneuver. And the fact that It's not something that the GM has to fight about or anything else. Hey, here's a couple of XP, or I'm offering a group intrusion, and it boom, done. Or the same thing, you can feed off a player. A player comes up with a really cool intrusion that might give you, okay, you know what? Let's take this in this direction. Let's explore this a little bit because this is transitioning us into another scene.
Another cool
I've actually done that in Al's game with player intrusions.
Yeah.
If I see a scene is going entirely too long, I'll be like, Al, I want a player intrusion. And I'll transition as a player. If I could recognize that we're bidding in a spot for too long, I could be like, hey, can I have a player intrusion saying that I'm going to the spaceship,
Yep.
And hopefully the other players will follow me. You know what I mean?
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Like on top of GM intrusions, player intrusions, like the way you're saying, help if like let's say you have a newer GM or a GM who's struggling, a seasoned player can recognize that and use a player intrusion to help. Like most of the time these seasoned players are also GMs, so they can recognize the story beats are being missed or the pacing's a little off, and they can be like, hey, here's a player intrusion, let me help you out a little bit. Yeah. And again, if it's a really fun mechanic even if you don't use it in that way, but the fact that a seasoned player can help with the pacing with that mechanic is just stupendous.
The other point I want to make about intrusions is we set this on multiple videos, but GM intrusions are the ultimate whiteout in RPGs.
Absolutely.
If you fucked up in the plot, guess what? Pull out your whiteout bottle, GM intrusion. We changing the plot to fit back on the rails of the way I want to go.
Exactly. And fix
you messed up in your pacing. You cut out an important scene or NPC that you forgot, and you wind up speeding up the session. And now they're at a point where they needed this information, an hour ago. Pull out your whiteout bottle. Guess what? I fucked up. Here's a GM intrusion. This information is now available to you right now. Right? The players are messing up your pacing. They're taking too long to get to a point because they couldn't beat a simple battle that you thought was going to be easy. Guess what? I'm pulling out my whiteout bottle. I fucked up on how long that combat went. Guess what? You're now in the main hall where the final scene is about to begin. Right? It's the ultimate whiteout bottle.
Just to provide another like real life example of this, I recently started a new job at Office Max as a cashier, and it turns out my supervisor, he plays D&D, so I taught him about Cypher System. We had a mini demo session where I could literally converted his D&D character simply to Cypher, and I had a little scenario where he was rescuing his party mates from his D&D, campaign or whatever, so it was just him rescuing them, or rescuing one of them. And, he's escaping, he had a fun little plan, but for the big bad evil guy fight, like every roll was under 10, like literally he could not land a hit on this dude. So by the time he's missing whatever, and at the end I was like, all right, you do want a GM intrusion? And he says yes. I give it to him, whatever. And I say, all right, so the ranger from your party actually shoots an arrow, fells this bad guy, and then because it was a demo session, it wasn't a horrible way to wrap up the session, but I had to wrap it up some way. I could have just let him keep rolling under 10s for an hour, So I was like, oh, actually, the GM intrusion was a ranger comes in, fells the bad guy, saves the skin of you and your buddy here, and yeah, it was a way to end the scene without him having to continuously roll. Yeah.
And the next thing we put down as far as mechanics within the game or elements from the game itself are ciphers. Ciphers can definitely help you with pacing as well, in the sense that they're those one-use quick items, and some ciphers are crazy. I mean, come on, you got like the perfect tool cipher. So, I reach in my bag and you know what? I needed a left-handed spanner. What the hell is a left-handed spanner? I don't know, but I needed it. Things like that will facilitate the game moving forward for the players as well.
The way I view it in the terms of pacing is it's like what Dean said, it's the one-use item, right? But you could give them the item they need for that specific scene. And you could pre-plan it, like, hey, I know the players are having a hard time. So the next NPC they kill is going to drop this specific cipher that's going to give them an advantage. Or work the other way. if the MacGuffin cipher, excellent Q, or it works the other way. If the players are running through your scene and you thought it was going to take 10 minutes and they're already, they whittled down the big bad guy to a third of his points in a minute and a half. Guess what? The big bad guy got this cipher that's going to level the playing field and add 5 more minutes to the scene, or in order to complete your pacing and make the scene either more difficult or easier depending on what is needed for the time.
Exactly.
And the cool thing, again, if you're the planning type, and most of the time, some GMs are anyway, but the way ciphers can help with your pacing is if you know that, just to throw a random example out there, that the BBE, like the evil bad guy of your session, your story, whatever, is weak to ice, you can give the players like an ice cipher early on that it's going to help speed up or ease that pacing of the last fight if you think it's going to be too hard given on how the story of the beginning was going. You see they're struggling with certain aspects, you can give them a boon that will help them at the end.
Yeah.
So, and last but not least, we have PC connections, but I'm gonna put a slash on that and say character arcs as well. PC connections can be huge because those are tools that you can use as a GM, where they have the idea, this one PC, your power doesn't work on, or this one PC saw you do X, Y, or Z. You can bring those things up later on in the game in order to facilitate and stimulate a particular action that needs to happen at the end of the game or in the middle of the game. These things are huge. Character arcs, I look at them through the other side of the lens. Those are little pieces that you can always have in your game, like we were talking about earlier with GMIs and stuff, things that characters need, but it also helps pace the story forward when you're doing your campaign, because now you can put a thing that they need part of their character arc right in there. And that might be a scene that because you couldn't think of something to do. Well, now guess what? Now there's an improv piece that you can literally put in without even have to necessarily improv it per se.
I also view it as it's a way of, remember we talked about having those invisible rails? Mm-hmm. The connections are a perfect way to institute those invisible rails, because if you incorporate the actual connection to either the other players or NPCs as them being in danger or doing whatever action there is for that person that they're associated with in the connection. It's a way to keep them involved in your narrative and wanting to push your overall story arc forward because it's directly related to that connection. Mm-hmm. And then it's sort of a rail, because they have to follow this because it's their backstory and they want to, but it's also an invisible rail because, they want to do it. You're not forcing them to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The connections end up being, like Anthony said, like these, unspoken rails, because it's canonical to the characters. Like they essentially, it's like a kind of like a unspoken contract. If you have the connections included, like they should feel compelled to meet those connections. Like they should act a certain way in relation to those connections, and it helps facilitate the pacing, because you kind of know how they'll react to certain situations based on these connections. Like, let's say 2 PCs are brother and sister or related in some way, that if you put one of them in danger, the other one should react a certain way. Again, that's a very specific example, but it is a way connections help facilitate the pacing of a story, or help you to.
Yeah.
And so, those were like the basic ideas that we jotted down. I think overall, my final idea of Cypher System is I think Cypher System actually helps you out more than a lot more of the, and this could apply for most narrative systems, but the less crunchy you get, the easier it is to pace, because a lot of times rules tend to slow down pacing. Not because it's the rules themselves, it's the concentration of getting the rules correctly at the gaming table during the session that is taking away your brain power from focusing on pacing, if that makes sense.
You hit the nail on it. It's just too many. When you think about it, when you have to switch from the rule for grappling to the rule to climbing, to the rule for running, to the rule for, shooting versus Cypher System. Guess what? There's a difficulty, attain that difficulty, let's keep it moving. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And, with that being said, I know we do at least have one question from the audience, but if there are any other questions, please throw them up in the chat.
Questions or comments that you definitely want us to say out loud, because the guys in the chat have been killing it. You've all been putting in great.
Yeah, everything's been coming up. Like I said, we've, looked at it. But Stormbreaker, you said Alpha didn't give an example of story beats for a 3-hour session, one shot. So if I had a 3-hour session, one shot, first of all, you know what? I'm going to jump right into my favorite genre. Let's just say I'm going to do a 3-hour session for superheroes. I literally wrote a blurb for it that I threw up and claimed the sky, where the characters are superheroes. You're getting ready to fly out to the edge of the solar system because an object is shown up, even at that point, it's a bright light in the sky, 3 billion miles from the planet. Okay, so you're superheroes on a premier team. The first story beat, open up, big session. You're waking up out of a hypersleep chamber because they had these new engine thrusters that move you through space at about 1 million miles an hour. In order to travel 3 billion miles, you can get there in, 17 days or something like that. Okay, so that's story beat number one, how we're going to wake the characters up and get them right into the midst of the action. Story beat number two, you wake up, you're like a day's travel from the object. What is happening? What are the 3 or 4 different things that I want to see happen in this space, for scene number two? That's hour number two. The first hour is getting there. Second hour is the exploration. Story beat number 3 is going to be the climactic thing. What is this object in space, and what are my players going to have to do? Is it a big bad evil guy that they're going to fight? Is this a ancient item that's flowing back from out of space and time, that travels the universe on a path, an orbit? All of those different aspects. How are my players going to do it? So those would be my basic story beats that I would basically make sure I would have for this 3-hour session. Anthony, you want to try to throw one up?
No, I think it's going to be too time consuming, but
Yeah.
you definitely hit the nail on the head. Like, it's basically same concept. It's basically a beginning, a middle, and end. Come up with a story beat, a beginning, a middle, an end, and then build out from there. Me personally, like I said earlier, for 3 hours, I'm gonna concentrate on the end and the beginning, specifically the ending. I'm gonna plan out my ending as thoroughly as possible, figure out how much time I need for that ending. I'm gonna plan out my beginning, and like we said earlier, I'm gonna try to make it exciting and going straight into the action, because I only have 3 hours to play. And whatever information I want to give them, I'm gonna have to give them that information in travel, in the transition from scene to scene, because I only have 3 hours to work with. So I'm gonna eliminate everyone meets each other and introduce themselves. I'm gonna add whatever information, allow the players to describe their characters in transition from scene to scene, and make sure that I have a solid ending.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Kid Up. He gave us a great compliment. He said, in the end, the only advice you need to learn this stuff as a GM is watch videos by Cypher Unlimited. We thank you for that. That's cool.
I would say watch videos by Kid Hub. He produces way better stuff than we do. But I appreciate the compliment nonetheless. I can't help it. I'm just self-hating.
Well, at the end of the day, you know what, we do appreciate the shout out. You know what, we do our best, and we love these discussions. We love you guys out there for hanging out with us on Wednesday nights. And my final statement is, overall, pacing, learning it is a ever evolving exercise. Don't beat yourself up. You know what, as long as you try, you'll get better. And that's all. Al?
No, yeah, I was gonna say before we close out here, or before we let Anthony go into his little spiel, I want to just read what JamX Runner said a little while ago. Just playing Cypher System improved my pacing for D&D. It really helps you learn how to think about the game. And to piggyback off that, just playing Cypher System, it changed my perspective, everything about how I perceived GMing, just learning how to play Cypher System. And from playing Cypher System, I feel like now I can go back and run literally any system. Like now that's going to be no problem because of the mind shift that happened from playing Cypher System. It's just such an excellent system when it comes to pacing, playing, all that stuff. You just get such a sense of what's important and what's not important to a session just from playing Cypher System. It's spectacular.
I can't agree with that more. That is facts.
Absolutely.
I would say playing, I've only experienced that with 2 systems in my life where that I ran them and then it made it easier. And those 2 systems for me personally is Fate and Cypher System. When I felt like when I mastered Cypher System, and not mastered as in mastered running games, but where I felt that I was comfortable to be able to improv an entire session of Cypher System or Fate, it changed my overall perspective on running every other game.
Absolutely.
I think those 2 systems in particular just really, if I mastered them, I could run anything and add narrative elements to those games.
Yeah, I said for me, this kind of a similar story. Like I said, I've been saying about the last 5 years, Cypher System has made me a better GM, And the other system that I could tag onto that was Powered by the Apocalypse. They both of them have, rules that facilitate the story, that facilitate you being involved. And those ideas have grown and evolved and continue to.
My last point is that, similar to what both the guys said, pacing is something that you're never going to be a master at, but it's sure as hell fun trying to get to that point. So just every time, it's okay to analyze your session, pick out what was good, pat yourself on the back when you did something well, and recognize when you did something that wasn't that great, and learn how to fix it. I hope some of the advice we gave you works for you. Like I said, you could be on either side of the pendulum. You could either be a too slow GM or a too fast GM with your pacing, but hopefully some of this advice help on either way. And we all have our issues. So, and everyone here, I tend to think that I'm okay with my pacing until I run a session and go back and analyze it and realize that I effed up all over the place. And I go back and figure out ways to learn. So always try to learn, always try to get better. It's not only is it good for you, it's good for your players at your table, and it's good for all gamers in general.
All right. So Anthony,
if you like us and you like what we do, join the Cypher Unlimited Discord server for all things Monty Cook games. We have the largest fan-run Discord server. You could play games, you could talk about games, you could chat about games. We have everything MCG related. So please join. We're almost at 4,000, or we should be at 4,000, somewhere in that area. But if Discord's not for you, join our Facebook group. It's not as big as our Discord, but it's great conversations being had there as well. Please like, share, and subscribe here on Twitch. We really appreciate it. And give us a follow. And if you can't do that, then go to our YouTube channel and like, share, and subscribe there. We're trying to get to 1,000 subs. We're like 900 away, and we're really excited to get there. So please, if you can find in the kindness of your heart, go over there and give us a subscribe and follow there. Or if not, if you want to support us in some ways, go to our online store, pick up some cool Cypher Unlimited merch like me and Dean got on. You'd be the coolest kid on the block with the CU stuff. Or give us a donation of coffee. Our videos are always free, but it helps us out with little things like Zoom costs. And last but not least, we love you guys.
Yep, thank you guys again so much. And just a little quick correction, we're less than 100 away from 1,000. You said we're 900 away.
Oh, yeah, we're less than 100.
We're a little less than 100 away.
I took it back. Yeah, I paced this all the way back.
But yes, so all subs help. So yeah, if you haven't subbed yet, be sure to, because we're very, very close to 1,000. But yeah, thank you again so much. And from us at the CU, we will see you later. Peace.
Bye, guys.